When I heard that there would be an Essentials of Freedom workshop this year, what came to mind was, how do we get heard? Because to me it's an essential of freedom, not just that I can think, I can hear, but that I can also get heard. Otherwise, I really don't have freedom. So to me, an essential of freedom is getting heard. I know that so many people, especially I've been very involved with things to do with Islam and the threat of Islam, so many people have the image of Cassandra. Cassandra of Troy, she knew, she wanted, she spoke, she wasn't heard. And I've heard this image over and over. It's an awful image, whatever it is. If it's about economics, if it's about education, it's an awful image to feel inside yourself. And I thought, what would be a better image? Well, the other image I often hear is Churchill. Okay, Churchill. For 10 years, he wanted to get the message out. He desperately, Hitler is dangerous. Okay, I don't know if I want to be Churchill. That means I'm going to be wandering in the wilderness for 10 years. And when people will listen, Hitler has invaded Austria. Hitler's invaded Czechoslovakia. I don't really want to be Churchill. It's not good enough for me. So you know what I did? I used to love Star Wars. I said, I want to be Luke Skywalker. Okay, there's adventures. It's not that easy. But Luke Skywalker got, get the power with you, go with the flow, learn to use the saber. And he was also an adventurer. And he got friends to be with him. I remember R2-D2, I remember Wookiee. So I said, if I'm going to have a struggle, if I'm going to have a hard time getting heard, I'd rather be Luke Skywalker than Cassandra or Churchill. So you pick your own image, but a really key thing for me is getting heard, and getting heard with the belief that you will be heard. And by the way, I also like Luke Skywalker for another reason. In the end, he did defeat the evil empire, but the evil empire was not totally gruesome on the inside. It was somebody who had had a spark of love and goodness in him and had been misled early on. And I think that one thing, as I've been hearing over and over about Canadians and everything and what caring people we are, is that we also believe that there's a spark of goodness inside most people, though in many people it's incredibly buried, like in the Star Wars thing. So that's what I thought. Okay, so one thing is that we have an image of ourselves as I can get heard. Even if I haven't been heard and I've been turned down over and over, I can get heard. Then I thought of a bunch of other things, and I will talk about it. Okay, these are the things I thought about. How do we say it? Is there a way that we talk that we're more likely to get heard? Then I thought about, what are we up against? Because that's going to make a difference to it, and the layers of what we're up against. And then I thought of avenues, like where we get heard. Sun News has been shut down. We're all aware of the importance of the media, having the media there to get heard. My background is education. Well, part of it is getting heard in the education field so that we have children who grow up to be adults who hear us. And I also thought about a grassroots approach, like the Tupperware model, basically, when we have a message that many people like and want to spread. And I thought, how do we have a better grassroots approach? And I even thought of, and I'll come to each of these, do we need a political party of our own? And I know that you can have a political party of your own, like Wild Rose, and whoops, those roses suddenly wither. And so a political party of your own may not be enough. I also thought about this around Islam, where throughout Europe, Australia, there have been single issue parties. And by the way, in Canada, we have the Green Party. That's a single issue party. So I'm not saying agree or disagree, but a single issue party, even if it only has a tiny percentage of the vote, changes the discourse, changes the talk, changes the awareness, gets interviews, gets out into the public. So now a single issue or Wild Rose may have a large base. So I'm not saying it has to be a small base, but you can have a not so popular vote, a thing, and get very popular or small. But I think sometimes you really also need a political party which is in favor of the things that you value, that you're not trying to push around another political party. Let's influence the NDP. Let's influence even the Conservatives if they're not going to take care of changing government in a way that the people have the power, that you may want a political party that really wants the people to have power, and the people who are elected have to give the power to the people, to the electorate. So those are the 4 things that I was thinking about a lot. I also thought about building an audience. How do you get an audience? And which audience do you aim for? The converted, the open-minded, and also how do you deal with those who are deeply against you? And finally, I had 2 questions in terms of getting heard that maybe they're not that right on, but to me they were still important. And they were, what's the dominant voice say? And I was thinking particularly of the politically correct. Where do I stand? Where do we stand in terms of our message? And maybe we're not getting heard just because it's so different and there's 2 very clashing ideologies. What's the politically correct attitude to the West compared to what's my attitude to the West? And I think that's really important because I know, for example, I have quite a positive attitude and I get a lot of negative stuff. So it's really clashing worldviews. You're asking people who are politically correct to change their worldview. Don't damn. Final question I have is, how much time do we have? When I think just of the economic things, my sense is we have more time. Like, Canada has enough time. I'm not saying it has loads of time, but my belief from what I've heard and read is that there's more time than if we were talking about Islam. But again, I think we do run up against time, and even if you can change things in 10 or in 15 years and there's more time, you'd say, okay, I still would rather we did it sooner rather than later, but I think we also have to look at how much time do we have. Okay, so maybe I'll start with education just because that's where I come from, that avenue. A Jesuit saying that I got from my parents, give me a child for the first 7 years and I've got him for life. Right now what we have with the education system is an education system which is so alien to the kinds of things that I want, which is basically to teach people to think, to teach people to know, to ask questions, go for facts. So in terms of getting heard, what we're bringing up a generation, and we have already brought up a generation, because I got, about 10 years ago, I was long a college prof, my students suddenly changed from one year to the next. I was teaching things like critical thinking. One year I would say, okay, so how do we look at critical thinking? And people were, yeah, okay, let's. And the next year it was like, no, you can't look at opinions or culture or religion. They're all equal. And it was like, what has happened to people that instead of being able to teach critical thinking, just like matter of course, that the first things that students did is they slammed the door in my face. And I would have the students 40-1 against me. You're not allowed to do this. So now that's a much harder group to teach than a group that just needs to learn how to think. And I also found that recently a former colleague had me come into his class to speak, so I was talking about a bit about that. And it was very interesting in trying to get them to, and they did see that human rights were more important than multiculturalism, etc. But then Israel came up, and Palestine. And these people who think all opinions are equal were suddenly frothing at the mouth against Israel. It should be driven into the sea. Why? Because Palestinians have keys to houses in Israel. What? Yes, that was the biggest fact they had, and there was a genocide against them. Now, I have some facts at my disposal, like the population of Gaza has quadrupled, which is not how I see genocide. I couldn't get through to them at all on that. I didn't know how I would. But so they were holding these two, and they didn't see that these were contradictory. So one thing I see, and you're going to hear more about this tomorrow, we need to take the education system back. By the way, that last thing, when I left the class, I said, how would I have students deal with this? And I said, you know what, if I had that class, I would make them debate. I'd put half the students have to debate exactly that position that they all held, and the others have to counter it. So I wouldn't try myself to bring in the facts. I would make the students bring in the facts that counter the facts that they hold. Because they uphold, BDS, boycott Israel, divest, sanction against Israel. What is going on here? So one thing I really believe in terms of getting heard, we absolutely need to get the education system back. And maybe I'm going to jump ahead. Instead of going into the media, I'm going to say that I think that one thing that can be very effective in terms of how do we get heard is a Tupperware system. And I was told, don't use the Tupperware system. It's a Ponzi scheme and it's terrible and all that kind of thing. But what do I mean? Tupperware is something many people wanted. It was something very positive. Often it's sold easily. Now, I know some people were bludgeoned and hit over the head and you buy this or you lose your friends. But a lot of people, and I know, thinking about somebody in her 80s who loved the Tupperware she'd had for 50 years. In other words, Tupperware gave her something she wanted, something her friends got, etc. So I think that we need, as a Tupperware model, what do people want? And one thing people do want is I think they want the best for their kids. So if we can, in fact, put the Tupperware system around, our kids are being done an incredible disservice. They're not being taught how to think, and this is really it makes them so vulnerable. If we can put that into a grassroots model, I think a lot of parents might want to organize and also reach out to schools around this. I don't know, I haven't done this, but I know that the way, that kind of model, a grassroots model, if it's the Green Party or whatever, you have to make people hot about something. You have to get them about something that they will really care about. I also think another thing could be around the dangers of Islam. You know, in other words, I think it's something that people would want to know, and some people are hot to share it, and other people are really eager, what is the truth about it? And I think both of these things are things that you could easily spread knowledge about through a system where, you know, there was Tupperware, it was there. In other words, people didn't have to invent it or make it. Here are the things about what's good education like is an easy thing. It's not something that's, you know, not that tough to pass on. And the same thing around Islam, what's dangerous about it, etc. It's not that tough. It's really easy. You can do it in like half an hour. I'll tell you the image I had at some point about the college students. You know, we all know about polluting rivers. My image was almost like a sewage system being poured into the students, and the students taking this in from pre-K to grade 11. If you're not allowed to think, by the way, if you're not allowed to think about religion, culture, and opinion, you go against everything that the West stands for, which is science, which is empirical knowledge, which is all that kind of stuff. It was just incredible. It's like, you know, and I really thought you've got to clean up the system. Otherwise, I, as a college teacher, was term after term getting people whose brains I had to clean up, as opposed to what I had to do before, which is just pass on tools, talk about issues, give them theories. That's what it's supposed to be. We're not supposed to have such a bad education system that kids have swallowed propaganda instead of education. Now maybe I'll come to then that other thing that we need, and which is a media of our own. I was very sorry to see Sun News go, because it was the only media that, for example, did take on Islam. I did not hear it take on that much opinions, culture, in my thing in terms of, and I thought it should do that a lot more, because I think the education of children is so important. They are going to grow up to be adults, you know, and they're going to be voting and they're going to know this world. Shouldn't they have the tools, not to agree with me, but to look at the facts, look at information? I want kids to be as strong as possible when they grow up. And by the way, I had a CBC reporter, like I have a little one bedroom that I rent out of my country place. I had a CBC reporter staying there. She was a mother of 2 children, and she didn't want children taught. She had figured out that all opinions weren't equal, but she thought it was too dangerous to teach it to children. I said, well, I'm teaching college kids. They're 18 to 20. Still too dangerous. I said, they drink, they drive, and, tellingly for this, they vote. And she still thought 18 was just too young to let them know that all opinions weren't equal. I was wondering at what stage it would be okay. I couldn't get an answer for her because she just sort of fell silent. I'm just thinking about how rude it is. And this is like, I felt like thought she was in a secret society where she did know something, but, you know, she had this dangerous knowledge like the Masons or something, and she couldn't pass it out to the world. And I went, what is going on here? So I think it's really important to have a media of our own that is truth-centered, is fact-centered, is thinking-centered. Personally, my experience with media is online. And the reason I'm going for an online media, it's so much incredibly cheaper, it's so much incredibly less regulated. On the other hand, it's not that easy to get a coast-to-coast online media. It's not an easy thing at all. So, but I think that if there isn't a lot of funding, online is the way to go. The other thing, I don't know enough about governments. I don't know why there isn't a lot of push to get $50 million a year or so for a subsidized media that has a different message from the CBC. And I know there are a lot of you who are screaming and tearing your hair out, but if we're going to have $1.2 billion of subsidized left NDP, we should have, just on the basis of fairness and getting the message out, we should have a subsidized, I think to me, it sounds like a sane, logical thing. So you may disagree with me, you may not want to go there, but I wouldn't mind $50 million. Just out of fairness, it should actually be $400 million, but I was going to be really reasonable. So I would go online. Things that I know about online is you have to bring things together, many things, like an iPad, magazines. You have to get an email empire of going into everyone's email. You have to connect all kinds of things together. The only message that you may not already have about media of our own is I found that Sun News was too news-focused. And I don't watch the news. I mean, I get little bits and pieces here and there. I'm somebody who's much more music-centered. I'm much more likely to listen to a song and have it go through my head. I think we need to deliberately create music with our messages. I don't know if any of you remember songs like 1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? I mean, I think that a music of our own would be really great. And and then also comedy, that it would be integrated. In other words, an integrated media. I'm not saying we have to do it. I'm saying that's an idea that I would have. I said one thing that was very important was how do we say these things? And part of it, how, might be through comedy and songs. Another thing is tell a story that people like to hear. In other words, tell the dominant story and just put different characters in it. Like the dominant story is the poor victims of this group or that group. That's the dominant story, and they are right and everyone else is wrong. And so to retell that story, we're the poor victims. We're maligned, etc. So you just tell the story and you put a different character as the hero, heroine. And by the way, that is actually more accurate often these days. When, look, we don't get heard. We're the ones who think of ourselves as, experience ourselves as Cassandra very often. Well, in other words, that's the true story. So on the other hand, you may do that and you may still not get heard because the other people may have a vested interest in not hearing you. And so in terms of what are we up against, there are two main groups. One is the misguided, and the second is the people who know what they're doing and deliberately do not want you heard. They may know you're telling the truth. So and the misguided, it may be just as hard to reach because you hurt people's self-esteem if you point out that they're wrong. It's humiliating to find out you spent 10 years of your life fighting for something and that you've been taken in by somebody. Just think about Germans after World War II, fighting about the Nazis, and they may have been anti-Jewish, but they were not. Let's kill 6 million people. And so the German nation had this incredible humiliation and shame around that. The people who were nice, the people who were nasty were Nazis, and yeah, they felt great about it, and they're just like, too bad we didn't get them all. But the good people, often with shame and hiding. So in terms of the just misguided, it's so in so many places. Recently, I was given a brochure from McGill's Media Center as how great it is and everything. So I looked at it. It's 40 pages. It's not much. I'm going to talk about 2 instances of blissful ignorance, and this is where people have to be just shown something. There's one thing only that they talked about is they sometimes got involved with activism. Oh, really? Okay, so what is that? Stop Sun News. That's the one piece of activism pointed out in 40 pages. Before Sun News was created, they were involved with stopping it. Whoa, and I just went like, do you mean you wanted to stop a disagreement? And I know that if it had been a communist network that was going to be put on, or a pro-Sharia network even, they wouldn't have said stop the pro-Sharia network, stop the communist network. But because it was a conservative network, somehow or other it was the most evil network in the universe, and you even put it in your 40-page praise thing, like we were involved with trying to stop Sun Media, and damn it, we failed. Another little thing in there, they mentioned that they were very open-minded and they gave space to so many different viewpoints. So they were giving a review of their first 5 years. They mentioned one divergent viewpoint, a conservative. So what that told me is they had a wall-to-wall non-conservative viewpoint, and in 5 years, one conservative, whom they lauded for, like, aren't we good, we gave this person a voice. And then it's also maybe a way of apologizing for having had that person, like, this is our diversity outreach thing. So, and that's just blissful awareness. They didn't put that in as thinking that anyone could possibly criticize that. People like that may wise up more easily if what they are is blissfully unaware and not, they don't really want it, it just hasn't occurred to them. In terms of many of the politically correct, I think, are misguided, but they're also often still angry. And my question then is, who benefits? Usually, like, who benefits from our not being heard? When you realize that a pro-Sharia network might get on the air and there would be no argument. And there are just two groups of people I think of. And one group only gets short-term benefits, one short and long-term. I'm welcome to more suggestions. Short-term, the politically correct, the dominant voice. Theirs is a short-term benefit. Why do I say short-term? I say short-term because if they succeed, it's such also negative about the West, and also there's another force, and the other force is Islam. I see that short-term, these voices benefit Islam. Why do I say, but Islam also has a long-term benefit, because if Islam succeeds, I don't think that there's space for the politically correct, because the politically correct are not into only Sharia, only that kind of thing. So my sense in terms of are not getting heard, the politically correct are against us, misguided. Most of them are not, they don't actually want to destroy the West, but they're more like teenagers who hate their parents and, that kind of thing. The other forces, I think they can be both misguided and actually intentionally using the PC, and in the end, if they would succeed, it would be very dangerous for the West. That brings me to the last question that I had. Last two, whom are we aiming for? One, I think even reaching the converted is not that easy. Because if you don't have a media of your own, how do you reach people coast to coast instantly? It's not so easy. So goal one, you reach the converted. Then you try to reach the somewhat interested. Am I actually trying to reach the people who are actively hostile? That's not what my main target is. My main is get many, go for the low-hanging fruit. That's my thought. How much time do we have? And the PC in the West, I said I forgot that question, that's why I went ahead. Okay. I think that what I hear here, what I hear for the people of essentials of freedom, is I hear a valuing of many of the things of the West. I don't hear we are perfect. I spent a lot of my life teaching stuff like women's studies. Why? Because women have not traditionally had full equality, and I care about it. I have been for gay rights and racial rights and all of these things. Why? Because I care for freedom. So but my message is underlyingly positive. It's like that Magna Carta model. There are things to do, there are things to change, but the underlying thing is positive. What I hear from the PC is the reverse. I hear an underlying negativity about the West, and every other culture is better. And that's where it also comes that frothing at the mouth about Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, the place where Muslims are better educated than in any other Middle Eastern country, the only place with full equality for women, with gay rights and gay pride parades. It's totally crazy. But it's such an, and it's like this again, and the Israel is a mini West. So to me, it just doesn't make sense. How much time do we have? I don't know. I really don't know. It is Islam which worries me more than too much taxation, personally. I think, just because I think we have less time there. Canada is so resourceful. I think even if you have a squandering government, etc., we have more time. And that is what I have to say, and I'm very eager to hear what the other people will have to say, and then question and answer.